Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, December 9th, 2024. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for joining us. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said today the U.S. is determined to prevent the Islamic State terrorist group from reestablishing safe havens in Syria. His comments come a day after rebel forces toppled dictator Bashar Assad's government there, and U.S. warplanes struck more than 75 ISIS camps there, and the Israeli military struck chemical weapons sites and temporarily seized control of the demilitarized zone separating the two countries. We'll hear from Secretary Blinken, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu coming up. Congress returned to work today. The House worked on final versions of two bills, one that funds water infrastructure projects and another that will add new federal judgeships in U.S. District Court. The Senate continued work on President Biden's judicial nominations, and Republican senators also meeting with two of President-elect Trump's cabinet picks. Director of National Intelligence nominee Tulsi Gabbard, who was set to meet with at least 3 members today, and Defense Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth, who is scheduled to meet with at least 20 members this week. On the list for both nominees, Joni Ernst of Iowa, whose support is key to both confirmations and who released a statement about her meeting with Pete Hegseth today. We'll tell you about that coming up. Secretary Blinken spoke today from the State Department about the situation in Syria.
It's impossible not to be moved by the scenes of jubilation, the scenes of relief coming out of Syria. People dancing in the streets, families weeping as they embrace children, husbands, wives who've spent years locked away in the Assad regime's prison. After 14 years of conflict and decades of brutal repression under the Assad regime, Syrians finally feel hope for their future. The overwhelming majority of people in Syria have only known life under the iron fist of the Assads. Now, they will know something else. The end of this regime is a defeat for all who enabled its barbarity and its corruption, none more than Iran, Hezbollah, and Russia. So this moment presents a historic opportunity, but it also carries considerable risks. History shows how quickly moments of promise can descend into conflict and violence. ISIS will try to use this period to reestablish its capabilities, to create safe havens. As our precision strikes over the weekend demonstrate, we are determined not to let that happen, and will continue to protect our personnel against any threats from any quarters. The Syrian people have endured so much suffering. We have work to do to ensure that they endure no more. It's imperative that all actors involved protect civilians, respect human rights, especially of vulnerable minorities, preserve the state's institutions and services to help meet the needs of the Syrian people, and to build toward inclusive governance. Statements by rebel leaders to these ends are very welcome. But of course, the real measure of their commitment is not just what they say, but what they do. We're engaging closely with our partners in the region on the situation in northeastern Syria, underscoring to all parties the need to de-escalate and protect civilian populations. And with every party we engage, we'll continue to seek information about Austin Tice so that we can find him and bring him home to his family and loved ones.
He also talked about America's role in the region going forward.
The Syrian people have to be the ones to choose their path, their future. Senior officials from this department are fanning out through the region as we speak, working with counterparts on how the United States can help support the Syrian people as they decide their own path for the future, including now through providing humanitarian assistance directly to people, particularly those who've been displaced, and help them begin to recover. Over the coming days, I'll be in close consultations, as we've been throughout the weekend, with key allies and key partners in the region, as well as beyond. Now, the United States has clear and enduring interests in Syria. We have a strong interest in preventing the reemergence of ISIS, given the death and destruction that it's wrought for so long. We have a clear interest in ensuring that whatever weapons of mass destruction or components are left in Syria do not fall into the wrong hands. We have a clear interest in doing what we can to avoid the fragmentation of Syria, mass migrations from Syria, and, of course, the export of terrorism and extremism. The region and the world have a responsibility to support the Syrian people as they begin to rebuild their country and chart a new direction. The United States should be committed to supporting them as they do that.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin also talking about the situation in Syria. Secretary Austin was in Japan today, and he said the world was surprised at how fast Bashar Assad's rule collapsed, and he also talked about the U.S. airstrikes against ISIS.
I think the entire international community was surprised to see that the opposition forces moved as quickly as they did. And I think everybody expected to see a much more stiff resistance from Assad's forces. So the speed at which that unfolded was surprising, I think, to most everybody in the international community. In terms of what has transpired, of course, as this unfolds, there's a potential that elements in the area, such as ISIS, could try to take advantage of this opportunity and regain capability. We've been tracking ISIS as a part of our Defeat ISIS campaign for some time, as you know, and we've seen cells trying to strengthen and develop additional capability out in the Badaya Desert, and those strikes were focused on those cells. And as you know, we reported out that we attacked some 75 targets with a number of different platforms, and we're still evaluating the results. But I think that we're going to find that we've been pretty successful.
The Military Times is reporting that American B-52 bombers, F-15 fighters, and A-10 Warthogs were used on the ISIS sites in central Syria. Also speaking about yesterday's events was Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
This is a historic day for the Middle East. The collapse of the Assad regime, the tyranny in Damascus, offers great opportunity, but also is fraught with significant dangers. This collapse is a direct result of our forceful action against Hezbollah and Iran, Assad's main supporters. It set off a chain reaction of all those who want to free themselves from this tyranny and its oppression. But it also means we have to take action against possible threats. One of them is the collapse of the Separation of Forces Agreement from 1974 between Israel and Syria. This agreement held for 50 years. Last night it collapsed. The Syrian army abandoned its positions. We gave the Israeli army the order to take over these positions to ensure that no hostile force embeds itself right next to the border of Israel. This is a temporary defensive position until a suitable arrangement is found. Equally, we send a hand of peace to all those beyond our border in Syria, to the Druze, to the Kurds, to the Christians, and to the Muslims who want to live in peace with Israel. We're going to follow events very carefully. If we can establish neighborly relations and a peaceful relations with the new forces emerging in Syria, that's our desire. But if we do not, we'll do whatever it takes to defend the state of Israel and the border of Israel.
That 1974 agreement is the one that includes the Golan Heights. It's the area where Israel, Lebanon, and Syria border each other and sits about 40 miles southwest of Damascus. At today's State Department briefing, spokesman Matthew Miller talked about the Israeli military's moves there.
So let me say a few things about it. Number one, I think it's important to put in context what happened that led up to this event. First of all, the Syrian army abandoned its positions in the area around the negotiated Israeli-Syrian buffer zone, which potentially creates a vacuum that could have been filled by terrorist organizations that would threaten the state of Israel and would threaten civilians inside Israel. Every country has the right to take action against terrorist organizations, and every country, I think, would be worried about a possible vacuum that could be filled by terrorist organizations on its border. especially in volatile times, as we obviously are in right now in Syria. The second thing that is important is that Israel has said that these actions are temporary to defend its borders. These are not permanent actions. And so ultimately, what we want to see is lasting stability between Israel and Israel and Syria. And that means we support all sides upholding the 1974 disengagement agreement.
Do you feel that they're holding up that disengagement agreement?
Well, look, this is a temporary action that they have taken in response to actions by the Syrian military to withdraw from that area. Now, what we want to see ultimately is that agreement fully upheld, and we will watch to see that Israel does that. They have said that this is a temporary action, and we're going to be watching what steps they take in the coming weeks.
You're saying watching what steps they'll take. I mean, do you want them to take
Of
those
course,
steps?
we will be engaging with them as well. But ultimately, it's important that there is security along that border. Right now, there was potentially a vacuum created by the withdrawal of Syrian forces. We don't want to see a vacuum there either that could be filled by terrorist organizations. That's not good for, not just for Israel's security. It wouldn't be helpful potentially to the people of Syria. If you see a terrorist group move into the area that was vacated by Syrian forces, and it could lead to an outbreak of hostilities across that border, something that we don't want to see either.
He also talked about Israeli military strikes on chemical weapons sites.
Look, we believe it is important that the chemical weapons stockpiles that we know the Assad regime was maintaining be locked down and that they be destroyed. And we will continue to work with our partners in the region to that effect, and we will continue to make clear to the incoming government, the incoming regime, that is important. Now, look, we have seen the public statements from HTS that they do not want to use chemical weapons. They have no interest in using chemical weapons. That's a productive statement, but we want to see those chemical weapons stockpiles secured, and we want to see them ultimately destroyed.
We heard Matthew Miller reference HTS. They are one of the militant groups that led opposition forces into Damascus. The State Department considers them a terrorist group, and its leader yesterday appeared on Syrian state television to declare the nation free. He also pledged more tolerance. At today's briefing, Matthew Miller said top U.S. hostage envoy Roger Carstens is in Beirut as part of the efforts to find and free freelance journalist Austin Tice. You can see all of today's State Department briefing on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and at cspan.org. And AFP is reporting that today that National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan will travel to Israel this week for talks on the situation in Syria. This morning, Jake Sullivan talked about U.S. priorities in the region.
Number one priority, obviously, is to protect the United States of America from the resurgence of a terror threat emanating from Syria, and that means holding ISIS down. Don't let them take advantage of this. Then there is the priority of making sure that our friends in the region are secure and stable. Israel, Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, that these countries do not suffer from any kind of violent spillover effects from what's happening in Syria. And then finally, it is to support the Syrian people as they try to build a better future for their country. These are the steps that we are going to take, we have started taking, and we'll do it in concert with our friends in the region.
What more do we know about how Assad escaped to Moscow and what's going to happen with him next?
We actually don't know the circumstances of his departure, how he fled his country, got on a plane, and got to Moscow. What we do know is that his backers, Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah, couldn't come to his aid because they have been weakened and exposed because of conflicts happening elsewhere. Russia weakened and exposed because of Ukraine. Iran and Hezbollah weakened and exposed because they made the grave mistake of trying to attack Israel after October 7th. The U.S. stood up in support and defense of Israel, stood up in support of defense of Ukraine, and the result is Assad was basically naked and alone without friends and had to flee.
He's got one friend in Moscow. Can he be held accountable for his actions?
Well, a lot of that's going to turn on Russia explaining exactly why it is that they're harboring a murderous dictator. They offered him asylum from the Syrian people who he has brutalized and murdered over the course of a long time. So that question is best directed towards Moscow. What we are going to do is support the Syrian people as they try to turn the page on Assad and build a better future.
Finally, what more do we know about the condition of Austin Tice, the American journalist who was kidnapped in Syria 12 years ago?
Well, as President Biden said in his remarks yesterday, this is a top priority for us to find Austin Tice, to locate the prison where he may be held, get him out, get him home safely to his family. We have offered a reward to anyone who can provide information. And we are talking through the Turks and others to people on the ground in Syria to say, help us with this, help us get Austin Tice home. We don't know exactly where he's located, but we do know that we're not going to rest until we get him home to his family.
National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan on Good Morning America today. And word from the White House that President Biden spoke with King Abdullah of Jordan earlier this afternoon. According to the White House readout of the call, quote, the president emphasized his full support for a Syrian-led transition process under the auspices of the United Nations as outlined in UN Security Council Resolution 2254. He also discussed the situation in eastern Syria to include the U.S. commitment to the de-ISIS mission, including the strikes conducted last night against a concentration of ISIS fighters and leaders. The readout goes on to say the president emphasized the support of the United States for the stability of Jordan and Jordan's central role in maintaining stability and de-escalating tensions throughout the Middle East region. The leaders also discussed the situation in Gaza and the urgent need to conclude the ceasefire and hostage release agreement together with a surge in humanitarian assistance for the people of Gaza. They agreed to remain in regular contact directly and through their teams. That the official White House readout of the call between President Biden and King Abdullah of Jordan. You're listening to Washington Today.
The weekly podcast is a unique offering from C-SPAN. We record it right here in the C-SPAN radio studios in beautiful downtown Capitol Hill. In a town where extremes get so much attention, this isn't more extreme opinion, it's extreme history, connecting the old with the new. Hear what's happening right now against the backdrop of the history you know. So listen, follow, and enjoy the C-SPAN radio podcast, The Weekly. And have friends and family who love political history and even love C-SPAN's coverage of politics? Tell them about it too. Find C-SPAN's The Weekly wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today. Congress is back to work today. The Senate welcomed two new Democrats, Andy Kim of New Jersey and Adam Schiff of California, both starting their jobs now instead of in January because they are taking over for interim appointments. In his Leader Time remarks, Democratic leader Chuck Schumer welcomed both to the Senate.
Madam President, today, two of our newest Senate Democratic colleagues will take the oath of office. The Senator from California, Adam Schiff, and the Senator from New Jersey, Andy Kim. I congratulate and welcome Senators-elect Schiff and Kim to the Senate. Today, the Senate Democrats add two high-ranking caliber leaders who have already had great reputations in the House, where they got a whole lot done. Senator-elect Schiff brings to the Senate an impressive record as a leading voice among House Democrats, where he was known for his piercing eloquence, his thoughtfulness, his unwavering support of democracy, and his courage. As former chair of the House Intelligence Committee, he brings deep expertise and knowledge that will make him just a great senator. And Senator-elect Kim is no different. He's one of the most respected and admired members of the House Democratic Caucus, where his talent was only matched by his decency. He boasts an impressive record of service as a national security expert and diplomat, and spent every day in Congress putting families first. And today will go down in history. Senator-elect Kim's parents came to America without knowing a soul, and today their son becomes the first Korean-American senator ever. That makes you proud to be an American. So to our new colleagues, we say welcome. We're excited to work with you. We're ready to help you. And as you find your bearings, we urge you to never lose sight of the great responsibility you carry as a member of this body. On judges, this week the Senate will continue working on and off the floor to confirm more of President Biden's judges. This afternoon we'll hold a confirmation vote on Tiffany Johnson to be a U.S. District Judge for the Northern District of Georgia. We'll continue the week with additional votes for other nominees. We have some more judges right now awaiting confirmation votes, and we're working to schedule their confirmation votes this week. We had a really good week last week by confirming an additional 8 judges, and we want to keep that going as much as we can this week and next.
Again, that vote for Tiffany Johnson scheduled for 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. If she's confirmed, the Senate will have approved 230 judges to lifetime appointments during the Biden administration. That's 4 fewer than the number of judges confirmed during the first Trump administration. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell talked about Syria and the Biden administration leadership in the Middle East.
If the Assad regime's brutality was an abiding concern for the president, or if the ongoing plight of the Syrian people factored meaningfully into his administration's policy, then his national security advisor's description of the Middle East last fall, quote, quieter than it has been for decades, end quote, is even more incongruous than the horrors of October 7th already made it. If the president now intends to claim credit for bringing a potential end to Syria's grinding civil war, it begs the question why, as vice president, he agreed with President Obama's decision not to enforce his self-imposed red line on Assad's use of chemical weapons. The last Democratic administration's approach to Syria helped Russia displace American influence and helped Iran turn it into a staging ground for its terrorist proxy's war on Israel. The current Democratic administration's scolding and hectoring of the Jewish state has made defending against this war more difficult. The Commander-in-Chief's record will speak for itself. History will reflect that if this administration wanted to heed the urging of leaders of both parties in Congress, deliver the sort of lethal capabilities and permissions Ukraine needed to defend against Russian aggression at the speed of relevance, it was fully empowered to do so. And had this president even once expressed a willingness to take a serious bipartisan approach to the Middle East primary agents of chaos in Tehran and its proxies and vassals, from Yemen to Syria, it would have found willing partners on this side of the aisle.
Two of the president-elect's cabinet picks were on the Hill today looking for support. Director of National Intelligence nominee Tulsi Gabbard and Defense Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth both met with one of the key senators who is important to both their confirmations, Iowa Republican Joni Ernst. She has expressed skepticism for both nominations. Today was her second meeting with Pete Hegseth, who told reporters he had, quote, a great meeting with Senator Ernst. This afternoon, she posted this statement on X. Quote, I appreciate Pete Hegseth's responsiveness and respect for the process. Following our encouraging conversations, Pete committed to completing a full audit of the Pentagon and selecting a senior official who will uphold the roles and value of our servicemen and women based on quality and standards, not quotas, and who will prioritize and strengthen my work to prevent sexual assault within the ranks. As I support Pete through this process, I look forward to a fair hearing based on truth, not anonymous sources. That from Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa, her X account. In a recent piece, a national political reporter for The Bulwark, Mark Caputo, wrote that Tulsi Gabbard was one of 2 nominees that Donald Trump is, quote, prepared to go to war for. The other, HHS nominee Robert F. Kennedy.
Those are the 2, Gabbard and Kennedy, who were a feature of the Trump campaign. They traveled the swing states, the 2 of them together. They appeared in these joint events where they drew 1,000, 2,000 people in places like Dearborn, Michigan and Las Vegas, Nevada. And Trump featured them as being part of his new coalition, his new political coalition, and now, implicitly in that, his new governing coalition. They're both former Democratic candidates for president, both of them, and they've both left the Democratic Party. And so they're sort of representing kind of the axis of the canceled, so to speak. But more to the point, they are these anti-establishment figures whom Trump wants to burnish his record with, his legacy with. And there's certainly a lot of controversy over both of them from the health establishment. Kennedy would be the HHS secretary. From the intelligence community, Tulsi Gabbard would be the director of national intelligence. But in the Trump view, the more you have the establishment criticizing the picks, the more it indicates how valuable they are. And so the oppositions to Hegseth largely are on personal matters, his behavior. Same with Matt Gaetz, the now withdrawn attorney general. To a smaller degree, Kash Patel, the FBI pick that Donald Trump wants to lead the agency. Whereas Gabbard and Kennedy are more on policy grounds. And that is something that the Trump team tells me that Trump intends to fight for. But again, it's Trump. Let's see what happens.
The Bulwark's Mark Caputo on Washington Journal this morning. You can see the whole segment on C-SPAN Now's mobile app and at cspan.org. Over in the House of Representatives, members worked on final versions of legislation authoring water infrastructure projects to be constructed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. On Tuesday, Louis DeJoy, the U.S. Postmaster General, will testify before the House Oversight Committee on the finances, performance, and ongoing efforts to modernize operations of the Postal Service. And then on Wednesday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken testifies before the House Foreign Affairs Committee, looking at the Biden administration's withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan. You can find live House coverage on C-SPAN, the Senate on C-SPAN 2, and full coverage on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and at cspan.org. Finally, today, Native American leaders gathered here in Washington, D.C. for the 2024 Tribal Nations Summit. The White House announced at today's event increased funding for Indian Health Service programs, initiatives to strengthen tribal education systems, and measures to preserve tribal lands and natural resources. One of this year's speakers, Vice President Kamala Harris, who spoke about Native American women's health care.
Women in America die at a higher rate in connection with childbirth than women in any other so-called wealthy country in the world. And the latest numbers tell us it was twice as likely. The current numbers are that Native women are 3 times more likely than others to die in connection with childbirth. 3 years ago, this very month, as Vice President, I challenged every state in our country to address this crisis. And in particular, I challenged them to extend postpartum coverage under Medicaid from a measly, what they were doing, 2 months to 1 year. I am proud to report that whereas when I issued the challenge, and I was pretty shameless about it, I really challenged them, right? Like I was in their face about it. When I first did it, only 3 states had Medicaid coverage postpartum beyond 2 months. As of today, 46 states offer a full year of postpartum coverage, right? And there are so many leaders in this room that are behind that work, and I thank you. So, and by the way, those stats tell us that it includes, of those 46 states, every one of the 10 states with the largest Native populations. And so, of course, the leaders here know what this means. It means that now there are thousands more Native women who have access to a full year of care, from vaccinations to checkups to postpartum depression screenings. It makes a difference. And all of this to know what we, again, must always do, fight for the dignity of all people.
From the 2024 Tribal Nations Summit at the White House, you can see the entire event on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and at cspan.org. That's all also where you can get this program as a podcast. It's also on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And for more on the stories that are shaping Washington every day, get our daily email word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, our live forum involving you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy from Washington and across the country. Coming up Tuesday morning, a look at new research on how much wealthy Americans pay in federal taxes with Tax Foundation senior economist Erica York. Then New York Democratic Congressman Paul Tonko on the looming federal spending deadline, the incoming Trump administration, and Democrats' priorities in the 119th Congress. Also, Associated Press Pentagon correspondent Tara Kopp discusses potential changes in the Defense Department during the next Trump administration. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Join in the conversation live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Now, or online at cspan.org.